Folks, good evening. My name's Ian Robertson and I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. Just before we get started, a few wee bit of housekeeping. There is no fire alarm planned for tonight, no drill, so if the alarm goes, please leave by the exits. The toilets are out there, just outside the door on your right, and I would ask you, if you've got mobile phones with you, could you turn them off or turn them on to silent, and that would be very helpful. Thank you. Tonight, can I welcome you to which is the last public meeting in the Dumbarton and Alexandria area of this campaign. It's been a particularly long campaign, but it's been one that has allowed the Yes campaign to get boots on the ground and meet people. We've had meetings all over the Helensburgh and Lochside areas, the meetings in Gartaharn, Alexandria and Dumbarton. This is our second one in Dumbarton, and our colleagues in Clydebank have had a range of meetings too. So we've taken a step back in time and brought politics to where it should be, face to face, people to people, and that's the way it should be. Something that the media haven't allowed us to do in recent years. And to be frank, it's meetings like this when you really get to know what people are thinking about. So thank you all for turning out tonight. The format for tonight's meeting is straightforward. We have 3 speakers. At the end, we'll be looking for questions from the floor. I can say that I will be a strict chair. I don't want statements from the floor. I want short, sharp questions and give the members of the panel a chance to answer them. And then we'll see where it goes from there. I know that we've all got plenty of opinions, but I think for the undecided voters, particularly those that are in the hall, and if there's any no voters in the hall, hearing answers is what they've been asking for. So the plea from me is to ask the question and let the speakers answer them. That way we'll all end up a bit more informed at the end of the evening. I think we've got a tremendous range of speakers tonight, and I'm hoping that it will satisfy the audience in terms of the things that you need to know, why we're supporting Yes. And I'm not going to say much more because I could stand here all night, but I think to kick off, I think everybody's just about in the hall now. Some seats up there in the back right if you want. There you go. It would be you, Gordon, wouldn't it? Our first speaker, and I don't want to be ageist here, but he's from the younger generation. But Graeme Sneddon is 22 years of age, which dramatically drops the average age among some of my campaign team, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying that either. But I think for Graeme, he's probably of the generation who have got most to gain here in this independence debate. And I'm sure Graeme, who's a student, he's at university, has got a lot of aspirations ahead of him. And I'm quite sure his speech tonight will be about what it means for him. I'm certainly hoping that will be the case. And I'm going to invite Graeme to speak now, and could you give him a warm welcome to Denny Civic Theatre.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be invited to speak to you in this. I didn't realise it was the last public meeting here in Dumbarton, so I feel very, very privileged, I have to say. I want to kind of start thinking about the kind of independence debate in the context of kind of young people's participation in politics, because one of the things that we often have heard or seen in the media is, oh, young people aren't interested in politics anymore. We've got, people like Russell Brand, although I believe he now supports a Yes vote, previously saying, no, you shouldn't bother voting in elections. And actually the figures bear that out. At the last UK general election, only 44% of young voters, first-time voters, actually cast a ballot in that election. And projecting that forward, they've done the same survey again, looking ahead to 2015. And there's only going to be 41% of young voters that are actually wanting to cast a vote. So that's nearly 2/3 of young people across the UK that are basically saying this political system doesn't work. And looking at the policies that have been coming from Westminster, and indeed what I believe a no vote represents. It's no wonder young people are put off. We've seen down south the trebling of tuition fees for universities in England, Wales and Northern Ireland to £9,000. Complicit in that have been the Liberal Democrats, of course, a party that many students and young people voted for in 2010 in the hope of change. So we kind of look at this aspect of, we look at this in Westminster and kind of think, so like if people are going to say one thing and do another, then why on earth should we bother voting? And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think looking ahead, some of the statements that have been made by the parties at Westminster have been absolutely looking at punishing people, or punishing young people in particular. We've had the Tory party saying that they want to remove housing benefit from under 25, so there's a mechanism in which young people wanting to start out and have an independent start in life are being forced to live at home with their parents. Indeed, I believe the term that's been coined is the boomerang generation for my generation, people who have gone away to university, enjoyed their time, and then have had to come back home and live with their parents because financially it's too difficult for them to put a deposit down on a flat and actually move out in life. And I think that's one of these things that really we're threatening young people's independence if we stay within the Union. So, continuing in that vein, looking at the opposition, looking at Labour, and Labour's line is, we will be tougher than the Tories. So, what a fantastic prospect that is for young people. Rachel Reeves has talked about having compulsory testing for job seekers allowance for young people as well. So, we really need to kind of consider looking at the state of Westminster is, do we want to continue under this system that seems to put young people on the scrap heap? Indeed, this was the theme actually of an advert that I saw recently online. It was a charity called Future You that said 1 million young people feel like they're on the scrap heap. That's what a no vote, I believe, represents for young people. Now, I want to kind of continue on this theme as well, because if you look at the kind of early years indicator, you look at poverty in Scotland and inequality in Scotland, within the Union, the UK has delivered the 4th most unequal society in the world. And not only does that impact on people, I feel that in terms of income, if we make a society where income equality is greater, then we'll not only have wealthier people, but we'll also have happier people, higher levels of satisfaction, quality of life. Indeed, trust in communities is actually higher in more equal countries. So we have a real opportunity for young people to get involved in their local community, but they need to gain that trust in order to do that. I feel that I have to say that only a yes vote for me will get the powers to the Scottish Parliament that we actually need to create jobs for young people in Scotland. We've already seen with devolution that higher education has been protected. Higher education has been protected. It's free in Scotland. We've had 25,000 modern apprenticeships delivered year on year under the current Scottish Government. Indeed, the Scottish Government, we also have a minister specifically for youth employment, something that's not actually been replicated anywhere else in these islands. And I think that spirit of innovation that we've started with devolution, we can continue with independence. Going back to some of the horrendous cuts that we've been seeing in welfare, one quote I was reading a bit recently, and one quote really jumped out to me. It was from Edwin Scrimgeour, who famously was the MP that famously defeated Churchill in Dundee at the 1922 general election. And he was saying of this, the Anomalies Bill, and this was a bill that Labour introduced in the 1930s to reduce unemployment at the backdrop of the Great Depression. So similar economic circumstances to which we find ourselves in just now. And what he's described this Anomalies Bill that was designed to toughen up access to the welfare state as a chase after a mouse. And I think it's been pretty clear that Westminster, or politicians at Westminster, certainly seem to spend their time chasing after mice rather than going after the fat cats that are avoiding tax on a grand scale. And one of the things that I feel very privileged, I have to say, to speak at this debate tonight, because one of the things that I've enjoyed having been a part of this campaign for nearly 2 years now has been this town hall revival, seeing all these people gathering together and exchanging ideas in public meetings. Many of you indeed will be familiar with the Common Wheel, which was started by Robin McAlpine of the Jimmy Reid Foundation. And one of the things that I really want to see in an independent Scotland is this idea of a citizen's income, a basic payment paid to everyone who's out of work. Because not only is that important to ensure that young people are supported as they're making their early years progression, it's actually better for the benefits bill, because you save having to subsidise poverty pay, having to subsidise the amount of money that companies are actually paying out people with tax credits, which is what happens under the current UK government. And I think I would rather actually you ask me some questions at the end, so I think I'll maybe draw to a close. But one of the things that I think about independence is that young people value the ability to make decisions in their own lives and shape their own futures. And a yes vote in September, it gives us this enormous opportunity to shape the country that we live in whatever way you want to see it. So I want to close to say to young people in the audience, and to come up and ask me questions later, that we can be the generation that builds a better Scotland. Be Generation Yes. Thank you very much.
Before I introduce our next speaker, can I just say, as someone who's got 6 grandchildren now, it's very refreshing to hear someone young like Graeme speaking so eloquently and having such a great understanding of what we need to do to make our country better. And thanks very much for that. Now, our next speaker is someone who I think it's fair to say has become a bit of an internet sensation in recent months. I've seen some of the figures for some of the videos from some of the other meetings that she's appeared at, and I think there's a really good reason for that, because our principal topic, which illustrates why we need independence, is something that's very, very close to all of our hearts, and that's the NHS. The NHS touches every single one of us in this room. We all know and have people that have depended on it, and we all depend on it at different stages in our life. And if there's any single thing that I feel that's worth a vote for yes, it's the preservation of that very precious NHS system. So I'm going to invite Dr. Philippa Whitford to speak to you about her perspective on why we need a yes vote. I haven't wasted any time giving you a biography of Philippa, because it's pretty well all over the internet, and I'm sure she'll forgive me for that.
I'm very grateful for the team here in Dumbarton for inviting me tonight I've lost track of which meeting this is. My husband and I, not quite as far as Jim, but we've done 2,500 miles since that little video went viral. I'm still doing the day job as a breast surgeon, so it's all getting a wee bit tight just at the moment, but we've been to Langham in the Borders, Elgin in the north, Arran in the west, Cooper in the east, and seeing exactly this on wet Monday nights, on sunny Saturday afternoons, and amazingly, on a Friday night. People coming out and sitting in town halls, literally the length and breadth of this country, and it's incredible. Now, I do a lot of Women for Independence cafes, and I have to say they're a definite step up on this, because we have tables, and we have tea, and we have cake. So, a theatre's lovely, but you're missing out. That's my kind of politics with cake. Now, one of the things that people often talk about, my journey to yes and all that kind of stuff. Well, I mean, I would have to say my journey to yes was about that much. Because in my heart, absolutely, there was no question. First time I ever voted, I voted SNP. I can't say I'm not a party political person. I've voted all sorts of people. In Westminster, I too voted for the Liberals, thinking, I agree with Nick, and look what happened. Don't agree with him now. But like most people, we still had to do the homework right at the beginning because we've been told for so long that we are kept. It was important to know that we wouldn't simply become independent and go straight down the chutes. And like other people, I was really shocked at what I found. Now obviously Business for Scotland do great meetings, they analyse the expenditure and revenue figures, and what you very quickly see as they show, for 33 years, we've been sending money down the M1. We're not kept at all. Now somebody got me figures which was from 1900 to 1921, and back there it was even more shocking. We used to send 4 times as much to Westminster as came back in the first quarter of the 20th century. And in the 50s, we sent twice as much to London as came back. Now that's long before oil. We get told, oh, we're a basket case other than for oil. That was back when the Clyde built a quarter of the world's ships. And how did the people on the Clyde live? They lived in slum tenements, the children had rickets, the adults had TV. So what did we get back? Absolutely nothing. And that really made me open my eyes up. I've seen a figure recently from them that even in the first 5 years after the crash, we have sent 8.5 billion extra to London than came back during the financial crisis. That's 1.5 billion a year. That's an extra 10% to the NHS and an extra 10% to schools. Or maybe we'd have divvied it up differently, but we never got that choice. And that's what this is about. That's all this is about. It's not about Alex Salmond, it's not about the SNP, it's not about any party. All it's about is taking control. As Jim has said before, we will have control of our country for that one day. Do we keep it or do we give it back? And that's all it's about. Are we a country or are we a region? That's what you're deciding. And the idea that we're too poor to manage it is rubbish. The idea that we're not genetically programmed to make political decisions is rubbish. I'm not even Scottish. But you guys are known around the world for inventiveness, reliability, engineering, manufacturing, and that has been taken away from us in the last 35 years. And what we've had in the last 35 years has been decisions made that we wouldn't have taken. We've been taken into wars I don't think we'd have gone. I don't think we'd have gone out to the Falklands. I certainly don't think we'd have gone into Iraq. And look at the absolute mess it is now. I worked in Gaza and Lebanon during the first Intifada, just after the first Gulf War. And I saw when we went into Iraq in 2003 that what we were sowing is the basis for what would be the next world war, is the Middle East unraveling. So that's what happened when you punch above your weight militarily. I don't think we'd have parked weapons of mass destruction just down the road from our biggest city. I don't think we'd have wasted $6 billion on building 2 aircraftless carriers. Now they say, I know they say that that's great because that keeps 6,000 jobs. 6,000, 6 billion, that's 6,000 millionaires. I'm sure quite a few of them have been quite willing to take £1 million redundancy for these 2 big hunks of metal that are not going to serve any purpose. I know that regardless of party, we wouldn't have introduced the bedroom tax. And I'm pretty certain that without more evidence, we would not have zoned the Central Belt for fracking. And we weren't even told that. We didn't even get any consultation on that. And that's what this is about. Decisions get handed to us that we either barely influence or don't even get the chance to be involved in. And that's what we have to decide. Are we big enough and ugly enough, as my mother would say, to stand on our own 2 feet and take responsibility? One of the other things we've had for over 30 years is the shipping of public resources into private hands. We saw it with the oil, when Brit Oil just got privatised to become BP. Okay, we get the taxes, we get the licences, but we don't get the oil. The clever thing the Norwegians did is they still kept a majority share in Statoil. We didn't. We just wanted the money in as quickly as possible. We did it with the power companies. We did it with rail. We subsidise rail more now that it's private than we did when it was British Rail. And I can't say that I think we get a better service. We saw the Royal Mail sold off at bargain basement prices. And now it's the turn of NHS in England. And the reason I spoke out, and that wee YouTube video was a women's cafe with cake in Straven on the 1st of May, talking to a leisure centre with about 80 women in it. And that, funnily enough, was actually my first speech like this, that someone videoed in an iPad and shoved up on YouTube, and I thought, great, I can show my mum. Yeah, my life has not been the same since. But the reason I spoke out is we were getting no media coverage whatsoever about the changes down south. Now, we could be very kind and think that the Scottish media think, well, it's not relevant, it's devolved. But the idea that what's happening in the English NHS has no bearing on our NHS, I'm afraid, is cloud cuckoo land. What has happened in the last year since the introduction? The first one is the Secretary of State in London is no longer legally responsible to ensure that every citizen in England has healthcare. That has been taken away. That comes down to these groups of GPs who are clinical commissioners. And what was slipped out in regulations rather than the Act is that every service they commission must be put out to tender between the NHS and private companies. At the end of 1 year, 70% of all contracts have gone to private companies. Now, those private companies are not actually bringing in resource or buildings or new equipment or anything else. They're simply moving in to run it. Because if you work in the NHS and your service gets contracted to the private side, well, there's now no funding to run the NHS version. So that just ceases to exist. If the private side has an alternate little private hospital, fine. Yours is just going to shut up. What actually happens, though, is that they tend to move in. They take on the buildings, they take on the staff, they take on the equipment. Stuff we paid for, stuff we invested in through tax, is handed to them, and they get to run it for a profit. Now, that can never come back, because in 5 years, when that franchise is up for renewal, well, there is no NHS hip and knee or orthopaedic service or physio service. It doesn't exist to even put a bid in. So this is a relentless movement of stuff from public NHS out to private companies. And the problem with that is the private companies want to cherry pick all the stuff that's lucrative and easy. So it's very surgically orientated, it's very outpatient-y, it's very general practice. If you're actually ill, and particularly if you have a chronic illness, they don't want to know you. So if you're diabetic, forget it. If you've had a stroke, forget it. If you have a complex cancer, forget it. If you get hit by a bus and you're in intensive care, sorry, you're on the NHS. So the NHS hospitals down south are becoming progressively more expensive for the patients they're treating. And at the end of just 1 year, 40% of them are in debt. Barts in London is more than 50 million in debt after just 1 year of these changes. The government had to put another 500 million in to bail some out, and even after that, there are another 200 million in debt. Having gone from having lived within their means the year before these changes. It's an absolute shambles. Well, any of you who work in a public service know that when a public service is in debt, what follows that? Cuts. Cuts in staff and cuts in services. And that's what we're seeing, is already the NHS in England is on its knees. One of the things I find very hard is that the whole collaborative and cooperative nature of the NHS has been destroyed. Because now the NHS hospitals are obviously in a fight for existence with the private hospitals, but they're also in a fight for existence with each other. If they have another NHS hospital nearby, they must win the contract. That is all administrators are thinking about. is how do we get the contract? Because they only get paid for the patients they attract through the door. Now, at the end of all of that, with the cuts and the debts, what are they starting to talk about? They're talking about charges. Reform UK and the King's Fund have both put forward the suggestion of a £10 to £25 charge to see your general practitioner. Now, to avoid everyone not doing that and therefore rushing off to A&E, what they're saying is there'd have to be the same charge to go to accident and emergency. Now, it's been on talk shows, it's been in The Sun, it's been in lots of papers talking about, well, let's just charge drunks, because they're a real pain in the neck and casualty. It's all the thin end of the wedge. It's all about introducing the principle of charging. I thought a little bit about a phone-in that was on Radio 4, and there was people phoning in and saying, well, I would pay £10 to save the NHS. I would pay £25 to save the NHS. I'm sorry, the moment people are paying, you haven't saved the NHS. The NHS is done for. That's it. It's over. The whole basis was you don't pay. My mum's elder brother, who died before she was born, died from blood poisoning with an abscess on his neck because they couldn't afford sixpence to go to the GP. That's what it was like in the 40s. Before Aneurin Bevan said, we need to change this. When people talk about, oh, how can we change things if we get a yes vote? How can we manage? They set the NHS up 3 years after we came out of the Second World War. If you're determined, you can jolly well do anything. And I absolutely agree with David Cameron. It is one of the best things that Britain has ever done. The other thing he quoted was the welfare state. That's one of the other best things we've ever done. The problem is, they are setting about taking them apart. Now people say, well, you know, the politicians are all on slagging me off in the news and whatnot, saying, but it's devolved. This is the biggest lie ever. It's devolved. It doesn't matter. Now, I'm not talking about next year. I'm not even talking about a couple of years down the line. But 50% of NHS leaders feel charges are inevitable well under 10 years. Well, I believe in 10 years' time, when there's no cooperative NHS, when it's all run by Virgin, Atos, G4S, Care UK, when MPs have constituents lining up outside to complain about the service, you think they're just going to sign money over to us every year to sit up here quietly with our unified public NHS that we went back to since devolution, with our free prescriptions and our eye tests and our dental checks and our free personal care? You believe that if you want. I'm afraid I don't. I don't think there's any chance of that. If we think, as you said, Ian, that the NHS is important, we should want to have it under our control, totally under our control. Because we don't control it. We don't control the purse strings. We send our earnings down the road, and then we get our pocket money back every year. And our pocket money is always significantly less than what our earnings were. And if we simply worked hard, stimulate our economy, earn the money, we should get to decide how we spend it. And the big thing people have to remember is all those things I mentioned at the beginning that I think we wouldn't do. We wouldn't be spending money on that. We wouldn't be spending 100 billion on a new replacement for Trident. I don't think we'd go around and as I said, having worked in Gaza and Lebanon, I worked a lot with UN peacekeepers, but there were no Brits and there were no Yanks because they're too much baggage. They can't work in the Middle East for the UN. But there was Finns, there was Dutch, there was Norwegians, there was Swedish, there was Swiss, and there was Irish. And I would be absolutely proud to see a Scottish Defence Force that was contributing to peace and stability in the world instead of us trotting around and punching above our weight militarily. That hasn't brought anyone any good. Now, Graeme talked about education and free education. That has made a huge difference in my own life. I didn't have support to go to university. And I would never, as a wee 18-year-old, have signed up for what doing medicine now in England would be almost £80,000 worth of debt. I just wouldn't have done it. I have obviously gained. I would hope that most of my patients feel that it was worth that I got the skills and that I got the training to look after them. And what we are finding now is south of the border is that talent is being lost. The way our talent is being lost is through poverty and deprivation. We know the association of deprivation with health. We know the association of poverty and education, life choices, life chances, people ending up in despair, ending up as addicts, ending up in prison. We all spend money for that. Running services, paying more police officers, running prisons, and yet we're wasting that talent. What we could do in a new Scotland is we could be taking that money and we could be spending it on our people, on a good start in life. Because the NHS can't give you health. What gives you health is a good start in life, is fitness, is education, is opportunity. All we do is catch you when you fall. And you're glad that we catch you when you fall. And all of you, whether you're middle class or working class or no class or not working, you know that we're there. And eventually down south, the aim is that that won't be the case. Because this isn't the work of a year. This goes back to Mrs. Thatcher's dream. And unfortunately, this was not, I have a dream. This was, people should pay, people should have insurance, and that's how the NHS should be run. Now, we couldn't do it back then, but there's been a relentless march towards an insurance-based system. And when Labour come in and go, vote for Ed, and we'll change it, they're the ones who laid the foundation. They're the ones who changed the law to allow any qualified provider. They were the first ones to bring private firms into the English NHS. And what we have now is we have a totally uncontrolled external market. And the next threat coming over the hill, which will affect us, is a free trade agreement between Europe and America that's called TTIP. Now, what that involves is breaking down trade barriers and American companies being allowed to enter any market in a country. Now, the NHS in England is now a market, so they would enter it. A country can already go to Europe and say, well, I want to exempt that. And what's very weird is Westminster has not even asked to exempt English NHS. And I believe that's because they see that as the fourth step. The quickest way to move us, finally, to an insurance-based system is to bring in the people who do it for a business. The head of NHS England, Simon Stevens, used to work for United Health in America, a big healthcare company. The direction of travel is clear. Our direction of travel has been completely the opposite. We have gone back to a unified public NHS. We work together, we cooperate, we collaborate, we share ideas across Scotland. You're not going to find that between Marks and Spencers and Debenhams. You're not going to find that between two hospitals who are competing. And we have that, and we can't protect it with a no vote. We know George Osborne has 25 billion worth of cuts that he's already announced. That'll cut us. We know that Barnett is probably going to disappear, particularly when they give us these pathetic little extra powers that we can collect a little bit more of our income tax. What they'll say is, right, Barnett's gone, that's 4 billion. You put your taxes up if you want more. Because that's what they're going to use those extra powers for. But the lucrative taxes, VAT, corporation tax, the oil money, petrol and alcohol duty, and particularly the Crown Estate money that's coming from marine energy, all straight down the M1. It's just oil all over again. What we need to do is we need to be brave. We need to take our future into our own hands. We need to not sit back and say, oh, well, I don't think we could manage. We'll let the big boys in London, they went to a good school. They could make the decisions. We need to grow up and take responsibilities. We're like 45-year-olds still sitting in our mother's house because we'll get a free dinner and our washing done. I think 307 years of sitting in our mother's house, letting someone else make the decision, is way, way, way past moving out time. We can do it, the figures show that. I don't think it will be easy. I think there's a little bit too much of people imagining that on the 25th of March it's just going to all land on your lawn like manna from heaven. It isn't. We're really going to have to work for it. But Graeme talks about being the generation. We are all the generation. We're the generation with the honour to make this decision. What a time to be alive, to make this decision for our children, our grandchildren, their children. But we also have the responsibility to make the best decision we can and then be prepared for 10 years of bloody hard work. But it will be absolutely worth it, because the Scotland we get is a Scotland we control. The Parliament will be full of the people we have voted in, and the decisions that get made will be decisions we agree with. They don't do what we want in Holyrood. 5 years later, we chuck them out in the street. We've never been able to do that. We've never been able to put a party out of power. So I'm asking you, in 5 weeks' time, 5 weeks today, when you go into that booth, if you're still unsure now, get your questions answered, do your homework, go online, get the figures, speak to someone. And then, in your heart of hearts, make the right decision for you. But don't do it out of fear. Do it with what you feel is right for you. If you're a heart and soul Brit, that you believe the Queen, Britain is the stronger thing, then vote no, because that's the right thing for you. But if you're one of these people I meet all the time saying, oh, I'd love Scotland to be independent, but we couldn't, you'll regret that. Be brave, suck it up, take your stubby pencil, mark it on yes, and get ready for a busy 10 years.
Thanks, Philippa. I think that just about covered everything I want. The reasons I'm voting yes, that's for sure. It is a wee bit scary to think it's only 5 weeks away. And like Philippa said, I think it's all about getting information and using your own common sense to decide what's right and what's wrong. I think we've seen in the media, the BBC and our press, that it's unlikely that you're going to get unbiased facts in any of those medias. So the internet, for me, is where I'll get my information, and you can pick and choose where you go, and there's no barriers, and there's nobody telling you have to look at this particular website. You go and find the answers. Challenge what you see in the newspapers, because I want people to make a decision, yes or no, based on evidence. I don't want them just doing it on a whim. This is too important for that. However, our final speaker tonight, I was slightly worried trying to work out how I was going to introduce our next speaker. I don't think I really need to say anything too much. Jim Sillars is a man that I've admired all my lifetime. The one thing about Jim is he says it as it is. He's stuck solidly to his principles all of his life. And today we had the privilege of having him going round Dumbarton in the Vale in what was torrential rain, listening to him campaigning on the streets of Dumbarton in the Vale. And very good he was too, and I'm very grateful for his time today. But he also was on a particularly special vehicle today, the Margomobile. And there's no doubt about it, Jim's late partner was also a very strong person, a person that stuck to her principles all of her life. And frankly, I was very, very proud to be part of that team today with the Margomobile. And again, thank you very much, Jim, for that. But Jim's a great believer, and I noticed today, he showed us just how it's done, about speaking straight to people, saying it as it is. And I think tonight, you're going to hear a man who will say it as it is, a man who has stuck to his principles throughout his career, and who is voting yes for all the right reasons. And I'm sure Jim will answer all your questions afterwards. But can I invite you to the platform, Jim, and say a few words? Thank you.
An illustration of the age gap. Graham's got one of these technological things. I've got a piece of paper. I would like to start with a quote from Margaret. Out of self-respect comes self-confidence. And out of that comes imagination, innovation, and the whole world opens up with independence. I want you to bear in mind those words, about self-confidence, imagination, and innovation, because that's what I'm going to talk about when we are independent, what we can do. I am a grandpa. I've got 10 grandchildren. And I've written each one of them, when I moved from P7 to the first year in secondary, I've written them a grandpa letter, on the basis that they're more likely to listen to me than their mother and father. And all the evidence I have in our family is that is a fundamental truth. And I've given them advice, but I've been involved in politics since 1960. I am not a trained economist, but I reckon I'm pretty good at analysing economic circumstances. So good was I that when the Queen asked Alistair Darling, did nobody know the crash was coming, I'm shouting at the television, I did. And I'll tell you why. There was a guy called, he is still alive, very, very alive intellectually, called Professor Rubini in the United States, who was warning what was going to come. And they called him Dr. Doom. And I've got a friend, a Scot, who now works out of Hong Kong, who in the year 2007, in October, sent me a document that he had produced for his clients with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse up there, with Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Fred, with his face on one of the horses. And what Jim told me was that the tsunami was coming, that there was major crises developing in the United States on the subprime system, and it was going to collapse. So I saw it coming. I'm only an old age pensioner. Alistair Darling, it's very interesting. Alistair Darling, you should go on the web and look at his last budget speech. 3% rate of growth and stability in the financial institutions. At the same time he was saying that, I made a speech in Edinburgh to 300 folk, warning them about what to come. Alistair Darling was talking about 3% rate of growth, stability in the banking system, just as it was about to collapse. And I can't understand for a moment why anybody in Scotland would take his advice in the economic future. So I've analysed the United Kingdom economy. It's at the last stage of imperial decline. We have to put this in its historical context. There was an English/British Empire. And like all empires, the Persians fell, Alexander the Great went, the Romans went, Portuguese went, the Spanish went, the French went. Why do we think the English/British Empire shouldn't go the same way? Rise, fall, decline, and final fall. We're in the final stages of decline of that empire. It's very important that we understand the context in which we are debating. The national debt of the United Kingdom is £1.3 trillion. It's heading for £1.5 trillion. And the £25 billion cuts that are coming in the public services next year are only tranche 1, because there'll be tranche 2 and tranche 3 coming later on, as this declining power is unable to pay its way in the world. So I've got to tell my grandchildren, I've sat them down one by one and along top of them. One of my grandsons, we go for a bacon roll and a coffee every Saturday morning. And I've had to tell them, probably grandparents, when I was a youth, had to tell their grandchildren, if we remain in this declining United Kingdom, the best advice I can give you is to get the best skill level you can possibly have, or if you go to university, the highest academic qualifications you can get in order to go to either Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. Now, I would like, on Hogmanay, to be in my own living room, in my own house. And I would like all my grandchildren to come and wish their grandpa a Happy New Year. What I don't want is a phone call from New Zealand for a grandchild or a great-grandchild phoning me up to wish me a Happy New Year. Now, I want to talk about two things tonight. One is fast lane, and the other is about oil in the Clyde. Now, the workers and their families at Fast Lane and at Scotstoun and Govan are being told, you vote yes and you will lose your job. They're in exactly the same position now as my great-great-grandfather and others of his generation were, captured by their companies. I come from Ayrshire, where there was steel and coal, and the miners were owned by the company. The workers at Fast Lane are owned by the British government, and the workers at Govan and Scotstoun are also owned by the British government through British aerospace systems. That's how far we have regressed as a people, a proud working class trade union organised people. How dare the freedom to vote in a democratic election be threatened by the threat, if you vote yes, I'll punish you by taking your job away. And the tragedy is, it isn't necessary. That's why I want to talk about oil and gas. Not in the North Sea or in the Clearfield that people have asked me, and if you want to care about the Clearfield, yes, it's developing and there's potential to the west as well. That's not what I'm going to talk about right away. I'm going to talk about oil and gas in the Clyde. You didn't ken that, and neither did I. I was an MP along with David Lambie in Ayrshire in the 1970s, and we picked up all the rumours about folk doing various seismic studies. But we didn't have freedom of information in those days. So when we asked the government, we got it blank. George Younger, who was a minister at the time, appeared to let the cat out the bag, but it was quickly followed by a statement from his office that had been misinterpreted. So from the 70s and the 80s, there's been a potential oil and gas industry under the waters of the Firth of Clyde. Chick Brodie, the MSP for that area, delved into the National Archives, and he's got files that length which proves all the scientific evidence of the oil and gas being there. But what he discovered, well, we would regard it as remarkable. I don't. He discovered a letter which referred to another letter written by a man called Roger Mansell. You've never heard of him, I've never heard of him, nobody elected him. But he was the guy who ran the Ministry of Defence. And on the 17th of September 1981, bear that year in mind, on that day, he wrote to the Department of Energy forbidding any possibility of the exploitation of the oil and gas under the waters of the Clyde, forbidding specifically any oil rigs being placed there, because they could not sail what was then the Polaris submarine safely up the Clyde past the Ailsa Craig into open waters if there were oil rigs all over the place. So they kept us in total ignorance of the potential. 1981 was the year when Margaret Thatcher began to destroy our industrial base. So onshore were being decimated and offshore were being kept in ignorance of an industry that could transform the west of Scotland. Glasgow should have become the Aberdeen of the West. You know what it means when Trident goes? It means that we can get that oil and gas, and it's a brand new industry of high quality jobs and high quality wages. What are the men at Fastlane and Scotsman and Govan worried about? We're going to be able to build rigs, to build supply vessels. We're going to have onshore and offshore high-level marine engineering. Fastlane or Drussan Harbour and places like that will become boom areas, supplying the new oil industry. Is it no better to build rigs than hang on hoping the MOD will give you an order for a warship? What we are getting at Fastlane, Scotsman and Govan is pure blackmail by the British government. Now let me talk a bit more generally about the oil. And the folk at Fastlane, Scotsman and Govan should realise this. There's going to be a huge programme of decommissioning of oil rigs. You know, there's over 570 oil rigs in the North Sea. That's not a puddle out there, it's a major oil field. A number of them become technologically redundant, and they've got to be taken ashore and decommissioned. Over the next 10 years, the value of the decommissioning is £10.3 billion worth of work. If we are independent, and we've got the power in our parliament, because it's our area, it's our lawful area, we can tell the oil companies, hey, you've had a good run for your money. From now on, you are going to ensure that the decommissioning of oil work comes to various parts of Scotland. And that's high-skilled, high-technical, high-paying wages. That's the kind of thing you can do with the power of independence. If we vote no, Shetland will get one, because they're starting to build one up there to decommission. The rest of us will get nothing. Now, the other thing about oil. Now, folks say, oh, it just goes on about oil. I do true a day. We're the only developed nation that ever discovered oil, and our people got poorer. Freedom of information now gives us the document written by Dr. Gavin McCrone, who was the chief economist to the Scottish Government in the early 1970s, as the oil began to be understood. And in that memorandum, he said that if Scotland was an independent country, it would be one of the most prosperous in the world. That was marked secret and kept secret until probably about a year ago. During that time, when they had that memo in their hands at Westminster, they were telling you and me the oil wasn't worth very much, it would run out and all that sort of stuff. So we've been in a prison of lies on oil, and we've been diddled on it from the day and hour the first drop arrived on the mainland. The other thing to understand is that half of it in the North Sea is now out, but that leaves the other half, 40 or 50 years of oil. There's 21 billion barrels of oil to come from the North Sea. What I want you to think about is what we might do with a tiny proportion of the black stuff itself when we can control that if we're independent. We have 40 million tonnes of oil coming from the North Sea every year. The amount of oil we use domestically in Scotland for our petrol and our diesel, for private cars, railway locomotives and the trucking industry is only 10,241 tonnes. That is 0.02% of that 40 million tonnes. Let us assume that we take 0.05% and we slash the price of petrol and diesel and jet fuel. Just think what that would do. That's just with one tiny policy decision over a tiny proportion of that black stuff. That would mean that folk in their own localities have more money to spend locally. It means that the tourist industry, which has a difficulty getting folk above the Glasgow-Edinburgh line because of the fuel costs going up into the Highlands. It would mean an enormous boost to the tourist industry. It would mean that our trucking industry would be one of the most efficient in the whole of Europe. I was in Campbellton on Monday night, and a farmer said one of his biggest problems was the cost of getting his produce to market, because it's a long way from Campbellton, up and down that road. But if he had half the fuel costs that he's got now, he's suddenly in a better position to get access. That's a policy that we can make with one tiny proportion of that stuff. The other thing we have to understand about oil is that those billion barrels of oil in the second half of the North Sea are worth far more to a nation of 5 million people than they are to a nation of 60 million people. I'll give you an example. Let's say I won the lottery last night. I think it's 2 million. I had one winning ticket, and all you folk are in a syndicate, and you've got the other million. Well, my 1 million's a lot more beneficial to me than the million split up between the rest of you. And that's the difference between 5 million people having that oil and having to share it with 55 million other people. What we need to do in order to develop the Clyde, bring jobs to Fastlane when Trident goes, bring proper jobs to Govan and Scotstoun, is set up a Scottish National Oil Corporation owned by us to develop that. I wrote a book at the start of this campaign, a socialist programme for an independent Scotland. I make no bones about it. I've been a socialist all my life. I entered politics when I left the Royal Navy in 1960. And my generation had a great ambition. It was to shift the balance of wealth and power to the Scottish working people and their families. I've got to confess to you, we failed. Failed utterly when you look at the condition of our people today. Men frightened at Fastlane and Scotstoun. The reason we failed wasn't because we didn't try. It's there in the Proclaimers song that we play in the Margot Mobile. Why should someone else rule our land? We up here, in the working class people, we are a minority in the United Kingdom. So no matter what we do, the truth was told to me years ago by an old man called Jimmy Murray, a retired miner in Netherthird in Cumnock, who said the great problem for the Scottish socialist movement is that all our dreams are destroyed by the London connection. Because if you're in a minority, you can't move the majority if it takes a different point of view from you. But if we vote yes, what we had ambitions for, in shifting the balance of wealth and power to working people, then we have the power and we can do so when we cut the London connection. With independence, it will be no more relevant how England votes than France and Japan and Australia votes. If we elect a government, and let us say it was a Labour government, if we go to the polls on a Thursday and we vote Labour, when we wake up on a Friday morning, that's the government we get. That's the guarantee of independence. The other thing is, you can't shift the balance of wealth and power to working people and their families unless you get full employment. They're boasting about 6% unemployment being a good thing. If we have a policy that drives towards everybody in a job, the bargaining power of the worker increases. If there's 40 workers chasing one job, you have no bargaining power whatsoever. That's why we've got minimum wages and zero contracts. I've written a book of how to get to full employment. And when we do that, the balance of wealth and power comes to us. Think of why the Duke of Buccleuch gave money to the No Side 10 days ago. He's one of the biggest landowners in Scotland. He doesn't pay a penny on his landowner and never has done. Well, when we're independent, there's a thing called the land value tax where he'll pay for the first time ever. He's paid money to the No campaign to defend his interests. I'm telling you, you vote yes in your interests. Now I want to finish by saying this. Human society cannot guarantee a painful life for everyone from birth to the end. It is not possible. There are accidents that happen to people. There are distressing things that happen. There are folk who become disabled. And like some of the disabled who are under pressure at the moment, there will be tears. There'll be tears when someone dies in a family or someone's seriously injured. So, but there are different kind of tears on the Scottish face. There are those tears that no government can do anything about. But there are unnecessary tears. A mother crying because she can't feed her children is an unnecessary tear. And the Scotland I want to see is the one which wipes every unnecessary tear off every Scottish cheek.
And it makes me even angrier to know that they tried to keep it from us. And it's only now that we're finding out that. And I'm really glad that Jim touched on that. However, this is the part where you guys get to ask some questions of our panel. I've got two roving mics, one on that side, one on that side. I'll take questions from the floor, and if you could make a question, that would be really good. Because I know there's a lot of people wanting to ask questions and they want to get answers, so please make it a sharp question if you can. And if you could maybe indicate who you want initially to answer it, that would be helpful too. So with that, can I just take me a second just to move the microphone? Hold on. George in the middle there, I'll get you started then. Quick question, George. If you've got another hand up, I'll pick the next one. Lady there in the purple.
Thanks very much. I would like to point out, not a member of any political party, but I would like
Can you take
to...
it a wee bit away from your mouth? It's just a wee bit.
Sorry.
That's better.
I'll stand up a bit. I would like to thank the Yes campaign for organising this meeting. I think it's very important, as you say, to get back to grassroots. However, the question I would like to ask is concerning the point the doctor touched on. The European Union's deal with America and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which will force our governments to have secret courts if they feel the monopoly powers challenged. So far, I don't think Alex Salmond or any leader at Holyrood has said that they won't sign this agreement. So what I would like to know is, could you tell me if either the Scottish Nationalist Party, I don't think Labour or the Lib Dems or Tories would refuse to sign it, but surely we should refuse in the event of a yes vote to refuse to sign that agreement on the grounds it will destroy our National Health Service, or at least give us a referendum on it.
I would just like to point out I'm not a spokesman for the SNP, so I can't actually promise anything. But I would totally agree that this, I mean, again, there's not been very much discussion about this, and it's as if, oh, well, you know, this is too complicated, this is not something for the public. This is something that will actually affect all of us. So obviously it has the ability to unravel the NHS in England. If we are just a region, the border will not protect us, because that would be considered a trade border. So exactly as you say, they could sue the Scottish Government for billions and push their way in Scotland. I'm worried about TTIP in total, because it involves things like declaring food additives, GM crops, chemicals, hormones in beef, chicken soaked in water, etc. And the thing is, we actually in Europe have much higher safety regulations to do with public health and to do with food than a lot of the American regulations. Now, there will be a negotiation, but the idea that we can make America come up to our level on everything is naive. Obviously, it's a trade, which means that there will be things where we end up dropping the level. What they talk about is it would bring in £4 billion worth of extra business to the UK. Now, the UK NHS is £110 billion. So you're talking 4%. Doing all of that for 4% of what you spend on the NHS. There's a health economist called Alison Pollock who has estimated that we spend about 10% of our NHS money on all the admin and all that kind of stuff. If you move to an insurance-based system like America, you spend 30 to 40%. You know, we get told that we have to have this drastic change down south to increase efficiency and decrease costs. Go home and look up a thing called the Commonwealth Fund, which is a Washington think tank that compares America with 11 other health services across the world every few years. They just published earlier this year, and they compared 11 countries. The UK system, now that was 2011 to 2013, so before these changes, came number 1 in 8 out of 11. It came number 2 in one, number 3 in another. The only parameter it did badly in was life expectancy. And they did say in their report that that's more to do with socio-economic. Healthcare, as I said, can't fix that. So if we're so good, are we really expensive? No, it's the second cheapest in the world. The only one cheaper is New Zealand, where you have to pay 140 smackers to go and access a hospital. So if we're so good, and we're actually so cheap, what are all these changes about? And if really you're 110 billion, you're actually going to spend 30 billion of that on administration, what is that as a trade in exchange for 4 billion. I can't understand why they want to do it, other than if it is this last step in the journey of deliberately getting in an Americanized healthcare system. What we talked about, which is these secret courts, it's not just within Britain. They would be bigger than our Supreme Courts. They're above the European Supreme Court. They are investor-state dispute settlement courts, and they are on a multinational basis. And it allows a company to sue a government for billions. Philip Morris, the cigarette maker, are suing Australia because they brought in plain cigarette packaging. So if you bring in any kind of public health measure, you know, or minimum alcohol price, anything like that, that they can claim would potentially drop their profits, they can sue them. So I would love to be able to say, hand on heart, I promise, that if we get independence, they won't sign. I would hope Europe would wake up and not sign. But what we're not even getting is Westminster at least trying to preserve the English NHS, whereas other countries in Europe are demarcating certain aspects of their economy to protect it from TTIP. And it's something that, you know, more people need to know about and be aware of and be speaking to their MPs and MSPs. And I saw an interview with quite a few, and they hadn't heard about it. You know, Willie Rennie, Ruth Davidson, different people who had, they're politicians, and they hadn't heard of TTIP. So be aware of it, look it up. It is a danger whether we're independent or not. But the threat to the NHS is if we are a region, you would not be exempt from American health companies coming in, because a border that was only a regional border would not be acceptable. They would simply sue the Scottish Government.
Before you ask your question, I'm going to make this like a wee bit of a competition. We've got a microphone this side and a microphone that side, so can I have hands up over here for the next question while you present your question?
This is also NHS, I hope it's not too specific, but my name's Muriel Robertson, I'm a retired health visitor, and it's another nurse's family that I'm asking about. She has a granddaughter who has Crohn's disease, and the regular blood tests that she has to have done are sent to an English lab for testing. Now, she did ask about this, and she was told we have a reciprocal arrangement. Could you explain a wee bit about that for us, and what difference will it make? You know?
I mean, this is one of the kind of recent scandals. Obviously, when Gordon Brown came out and said that we wouldn't get organ donations or blood transfusions from NHS Blood and Transplant. NHS Blood and Transplant, who only provide blood for England and Wales, we've had our own Scottish blood transfusion service all of my working life of 32 years. So the idea that we wouldn't get blood transfusion was not true. But Blood and Transplant had actually written to Nanette Milne MSP in August of last year, pointing out that they run the organ transplants for the whole British Isles, including Southern Ireland, and that therefore nothing would change. Things like blood tests, people going to Newcastle to get aortic stents. I sometimes have to send patients to Leeds. Obviously the whole Great Ormond Street thing, if you remember when Vote No Borders put that cinema advert up, it was actually Great Ormond Street who said, get that down, that isn't true. They treat children from 90 countries, and they would certainly treat ours. But one of the mistakes in this is people think we get given that. Believe me, we pay every penny for any patient who is treated over the border. So people who live near the borders and go to Carlisle, there are arrangements between Dumfries and Galloway and Carlisle. I have patients who end up being treated by me who from just over the border. All of that is being paid for. We do not get given anything for nothing. And these are called service level agreements, and we pay every penny of them, and they are protected by European directive, because in Europe they exist all over the place. You know, they don't have rivers or seas that demarcate their borders. Lots of people, you know, live in Holland, work in Germany and whatnot. So there are these arrangements throughout Europe, and these are not allowed to be taken away, so they will not change.
gentleman in the middle, you have a hand up over this side, one at the very back. And you got something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Torrance, retired shipbuilding worker from Govan, and welcoming the fact that Jim touched on possessing. We are having arguments today at the moment with the short tours in Govan and Yars about the exact thing you're saying. But be very brief, what you didn't touch on, I'd like to hear your views on it, Jim. Caledonian McBrain ferries will require somewhere within 100 in the next 20 years. And that would be an avenue for work to be put in the Govan and Yars. At the moment, the Rossi ferries built in Gdansk, Aberdeen ferries are built in Finland, and the new ferry for Stornoway to Liverpool is coming from Germany. So absolute nonsense for a Karl Marx, a nationalised industry. So I think that would be another argument that we can put to the government and Yard's workers, how we can retain these industries. Thank you.
The reason those ferries are being built elsewhere, and this is quite important, under the rules of the European Union, if it's something for the military, you can build in your own country, irrespective of anything else. If it's for civilian use, you've got to go out to international tender. Now, there are different ways to skin a cat. Yes, there is. The French are absolutely brilliant at it, let me tell you, inside the EU. The Royal Navy, it wouldn't be royal in my view, but then it might be in somebody else's. I'm an old sea dog as well. Now, the Scottish Navy, in my view, shouldn't have the purpose that we've been used to the Royal Navy having, and that's going out and killing folk all over the world. I would like to see, and I will argue when we're independent, that our Navy has a military function, that is to guard our maritime borders against drug smuggling and all that sort of thing, and fisheries protection. But it also has a responsibility to provide services to the community and internationally as well. So what you do is you make the ferries part of the Scottish Navy, and you've overcome the fact that I say that because the book I wrote was called In Place of Fear 2. And it's 2 because In Place of Fear was written by a hero of mine, an Iron Bevan. I was only a wee boy, I never actually saw an Iron Bevan speak in the flesh. But I followed his career when I started in politics and started to read about him and all the rest of it, got his book In Place of Fear. And what an Iron Bevan said to the socialist movement was, the most important in your weapon is audacity. The audacity to think the way the establishment tell you not to think, and the audacity to do what the establishment tell you cannot do. So if the European Union says to me, you have to put things out to tender, then I employ audacity and say, oh no, you don't understand. These ferries are part of our Navy. Not only that, let me tell you. There's a part of my book which some of my friends have discussed it with, told me not to put it in, that folk would mock the idea. But I held fast to it. There's a 16,500 ton ship called the Africa Mercy. It's run by a trust, which delivers medical services to the very poorest people in Africa. It does something like 3,300 surgical operations a year in 5 operating theatres. It goes and trains paramedics. It takes cataracts away from somebody who's blind. And, weighing with a cleft palate, it cures that. Now, just you think about that. If you're in a very poor African area and you've got cataracts, taking them away transforms your life. And for a child with a cleft palate there, curing that just absolutely changes your life forever. So I thought, well, there's 2 aircraft carriers. I ken they're going to put a crew on one, but I know the Royal Navy can't put a crew on the other because it's skint. So, and it's a liability. They would love to sell it, let me tell you. Probably the only one that would buy it would be Argentina, and they can't sell it to them. So in my book, I argue that it becomes the flagship of the Scottish Navy. And we take that second aircraft carrier, it's well beyond 17,500 tonnes, and we turn it into a hospital ship, an international rescue ship. Full of doctors, nurses, paramedics, medicine, water, and everything you need when there's a catastrophe somewhere. That would mean that we would be sending our young men and women, for the first time, out into the world to heal people, not kill them. A lot of people before I wrote my book, up and down Scotland, get rid of some ideas that weren't any good. But I talked to a man called Dr. Harry Burns, who's recently retired as the Chief Medical Officer of Scotland. He's now a professor at Strathclyde University. And Harry said two things to me. First of all, this would be a great thing for us to deliver to the poor in the world who have no medical cover. Secondly, he said, what this would do to Scotland's international reputation. Now I mentioned what Marco said, imagination and innovation. The great thing about being independent is you can think of things to do which you cannot do in devolution or in the Union. We can do anything we like. If we want to build hospital ships, if we want to convert that to a hospital ship, nothing on this earth prevents us doing so if the majority of our people believe that's the right thing to do. I've got a name for the flagship, the greatest humanitarian that we've ever born in Scotland. Let's call it the Robert Burns.
Gentleman at the back, and have a show of hands on this side of the hall for the other microphone.
I like your imagination and vision, Jim. It's been lacking in this campaign so far from both sides. I'm John Black, the leader of the Scottish Jacobite Party. We've decided that the Conservatives aren't going to fix the situation, neither are Labour and Ed Miliband or the Lib Dems. We've had an elected government in Scotland since 1997. The SNP have been in charge since 2007, and they're in the process of destroying Scotland. Jim mentioned that our dreams are destroyed by the London connection. After independence, there's a danger that our dreams will be destroyed by the Edinburgh connection. The image was portrayed that NHS Scotland is fine. I think NHS Scotland is close to collapse. But currently, the official government policy is to recruit doctors worldwide from some of the poorest countries in the planet. I think that's an absolute scandal and disgrace. Comments?
Question.
Well, certainly, having worked in the NHS for 32 years, I wouldn't remotely pretend that the NHS in Scotland is perfect or we don't have challenges. We face the challenges of all countries, of older people living longer. I would like to think I've contributed to that problem a little bit. I was told at medical school that was the point. I would have to say that I disagree. I mean, absolutely, we have problems. We have problems with A&E, we have problems with numbers, we have problems with capacity. But I would say that I saw in my career, when we got devolution in '99, and therefore all the governments that we've had, a big change in the Scottish NHS. So I disagree that it's on its knees. Absolutely, it needs help, it needs money, it needs a little bit more looking at what it requires rather than kicking it around at election time. We do need to think about how we deliver things. We do need to think about how we care for people who have chronic illnesses. And a lot of that work is actually going ahead at the moment. England is only beginning now to talk about things like social care combined with NHS. So not having someone stuck in hospital for months and months because they can't actually get the support to live at home. We've actually been trying to work towards that. We have a long way to go and a lot of work to do, but I would disagree. You know, it was the Labour and Liberal coalition in Edinburgh who brought in the smoking ban. It was them that got rid of Mrs. Thatcher's trusts. You know, I don't know, I'm sure some of you will remember that we actually had the internal market and the competition here. In Ayrshire we have 2 hospitals, one in Kilmarnock, one in Ayr, and they were set against each other. So we had all that. We were already on the first step of the journey. Unfortunately, just NHS England have just been galloping in that direction while we went back to being a single, unified public NHS. So I'm sorry, I disagree. I chaired the setting of breast cancer standards for Scotland. I saw Quality Improvement Scotland set standards for many cancers, many diseases, to set up the Patient Safety Initiative. All of these things that we can do because we're a single cooperative NHS that is lost down south. I will absolutely agree with you that we have a danger that after independence we just have business as usual and in a different city. But what I would say is that comes down to us. We've been up and we've been out for the last 1.5 to 2 years. I have been, as I said, in all sorts of halls, all sorts of places, with women particularly realising they have a voice, they can organise something, they can get together, they can discuss ideas. And that's something that's really important to me, that we have the women's voice in the independent Scotland. But what we all have to promise, if we get a yes vote, is that on the 19th of September we do not go back in our boxes. We need to stay out, we need to keep this energy going, and we need to ensure that we don't just get devolution or independence going to Edinburgh, that we actually get it to keep on coming across the M8 and up the M80 and up the A9. Because what we need is we need to have the ability in our own community to say, these are our problems, but I have an idea. At the moment, we sit and we do what Jim said, and we shout at the telly. All we need to do is this, and nobody hears us. And what we require is literally a devolution of power right down into communities, so that all of you who've taken the trouble to come out on this wet night will have the ability to be involved. Now, one of the things I've not understood is why the 3 opposition parties in Edinburgh are so against independence. Because all 3 of them have been dragged down by the London version of their party. The Conservatives have struggled since Mrs. Thatcher. The Labour Party lost many votes, including mine, after invading Iraq. And the Liberals blotted their copybook with the university fees. That wasn't done by the people in Holyrood. When we have independence, 2016 parties might look similar. By 2020, you'll be voting for a totally different ballot paper. And we need to make sure that in that time, we drag power right out so that everybody who wishes to be engaged, who has an idea, has somewhere to go. Because it's no good just changing Edinburgh. We actually have to change the communities we all live in. And we have to hear those voices. And we have to take those ideas and utilise them.
Can I just say, I am sometimes critical of the SNP Parliament rule. I'm a member, I've never been expelled. The great agony they all have is they've got a block grant. They can't expand the money they've got, and it's been cut. So you have this terrible choice between paying more money to the NHS, you have to take it from education or care for the elderly. When we're independent, we can create our own absolute wealth in Scotland, and we're not placed in that dilemma. But what I want to say to you is, you think of the attendance here tonight. This is not unusual, let me tell you. I've been from Fort William, Campbellton, Dunteanan, all over the place. This is now normal. This is the greatest civic movement Scotland has ever had. And it's the greatest self-education movement Scotland's ever had. We now have people, what we call, quote, ordinary people, who now understand economics, who now understand social policy, and who are now organised. And everywhere I've gone, Springburn about 3 weeks ago, I spoke on a platform with 2 young women, and I was very, very proud of them. They were 19, but they represent a generation that's now been politicised. They are not going home on the 19th of September to stand by. They're going to start creating new political forms, not necessarily new political parties, but new political forms inside Scotland. And you've got a responsibility to do that as well, you know. I want to ask working class audiences why you don't think of standing for Parliament. I get complaints about today's politicians. Ivan the other night in Troon raised a laugh in the community. He told this audience, there will be job losses in Scotland, he said, and I can give you right to the last figure. There'll be 59 of them, and they're all called MPs. Now, why do we applaud that? Because a new political class has grown. A lot of them, university politics, research for an MP or an MSP, MP or MSP. That much experience of life. Whereas you, in this audience, we've all been through the mill, we've been threatened with redundancy, we've been broke, we've raised families, they've had the measles, and all the rest of it. We've had family problems and all that thing. Everybody in this audience has an enormous experience of life. You are better qualified to make laws and policy for the rest of the people of this country than the political class sitting at Westminster and Holyrood. So don't complain about the political class, change them.
Scotland. I believe I'm a big fan of Leslie Riddoch, I'm sure many of you are, in our book Blossom, and one of the things that really struck me was in Norway, I believe it's something around 1 in 400 citizens stand for election to the local councils, the local government structure. In Scotland it's 1 in 2,100, I believe. So Jim's absolutely right in that we need a different kind of complexion of the Parliament as well, but I also want to see that complexion reflected in all levels of government in Scotland, and I want to see more young people being able to say, oh, I feel a part of decision making in my local community.
And aggressive and horrible, so I just don't go near that. But I've seen the online stuff on both sides, and obviously now I've come in for quite a lot of it, which I find fairly unpleasant. But growing up in Belfast, working in Gaza, working in Lebanon, there's not been a stone thrown, there's not been a bomb, there's not been anybody shot. So, don't do yourselves down about how negative the campaign has been. And one of the things that I would have to say is that I find it hard to understand this complete lack of self-belief. And I think some of it is if you have been told for decades and decades and decades that you are kept. And that is the case. People believe, and the commonest thing that I hear is, oh, I'd love Scotland to be independent, but we couldn't manage. And those are the people that are going to be upset. As I said, the heart and soul no voters, of course they should vote no. Heart and soul yes voters, we're going to vote yes, and we also have worked our wee socks off, and we'll know we couldn't have done another thing. But that group of people who vote no because the Daily Mail or the Daily Record said we couldn't, when the next 2 or 3 waves of austerity comes and things actually just get worse and worse, and then it turns out, like the Macron report, oh, actually there was lots of oil, or this new oil that David Cameron suddenly flew up and flew back, but no, there's no oil, he just flew in and flew back, or the oil in the Clyde. That is actually what's going to cause bitterness. we as Scots, and I am an adopted Scot, and I have to say the Commonwealth Games was an eye-opener to me, because I was cheering Scotland instead of Northern Ireland. That's the result of this. But all of us need to simply accept the result. I will need to accept a no vote. I will be sad, I will be heartbroken, I'll be in my bed for the September weekend with my duvet over my head. But I'll still have a job to go to on Monday, I'll still have patients to look after. And I would hope it will be the other way around. And that's something that people need to decide, that whatever Scotland votes, one side or other will be disappointed, but that we need to accept it and work our best for the country that we live in.
It was Churchill who said, land's enough in a democracy. The man's quite right. It is quite remarkable. Any other country, we wouldn't need to bother worrying about the vote. It would be overwhelming. The reason that we are in this condition is that we've been subject to fear all our lives. I've been here before. I took part in the 1979 referendum just for an assembly with no real power. And they ran Project Fear then. I was at Govan Shipbuilders with a guy called George Cunningham, the man who invented the 40% rule that prevented our majority becoming a majority. And I'm standing with him and the men are there, and he told them bluntly, if you vote yes, we will not give you any warship orders. Now I thought they'd put the head in him because that's a real insult. But the interesting thing was, these men of the Clyde put their head down and began to shuffle their feet. Nobody challenged them. They ran Project Fear then. They put people on a train at King's Cross to Edinburgh. And when they crossed the border at Berwick, they put on customs officers' uniforms and went up and down the train demanding to see your passport, because that's how it would be if you voted for an assembly. The Daily Express had a leader which said, if you vote yes, Bathgate will close, Linwood will close, Gartcosh will close, and shipbuilding will go down the Swanee. That's what they told us in '79. That's the reason they began to run Project Fear this time, because it worked last time. Last time I was talking to terrified audiences who did believe we were too wee, too poor, and that the oil wasn't ours. There was a woman called Janie Buchan, great powerful figure in the Labour Party, who was a member of the European Parliament. And this is the mental state of the Scottish nation at that time. She went on television and said, it can't be Scotland's oil because we didn't put it there. Yeah, but the Scots didn't laugh then. They sort of said, aye, right enough. I worked in the Arab world the last 15 years of my working life, and I told my Arab friends that, and they said, we didn't put it there either, but look what we did. But it's different this time. Project Fear has not worked. I'm talking to self-confident Scottish audiences who do believe that they individually or collectively are better running their country than the millionaire Tory toffs educated at Eton and Oxford. So this is different. And I don't think, let me tell you, and I'm not just flanneling you, I don't think it's going to be narrow. I think we're going to win by at least 55%. Audience that, a man said, you're rang. I've just put money on in the bookies, 56 and above.
A few hands now. We have the lady in the middle first. And the gentleman there standing up. Second question.
My name is Rose Harvey. I have a very specific question. I don't mind who answers it. I'm a member of the Green Party, as some of you perhaps know that. Given that the west coast of Scotland has some of the strongest wind, wave, tidal powers anywhere in Europe. While I respect the fact that there is a huge amount of oil left in the North Sea and it has to be used, I'm passionately against Trident, and I feel very strongly that the people who work at Faslane, in Scotland and Govan must have highly skilled jobs. Would it not be better for these workers to be encouraged to exploit renewable energy rather than exploit yet more oil, which contributes to climate change?
Well, I would certainly agree that we do need to enhance our renewables potential beyond what we currently have with devolution. But what certainly struck me, interestingly enough, is that renewables service agreements were actually removed from a piece of legislation at Westminster which allowed them to take power back from the Scottish Parliament, which is a serious concern. And I believe that with independence we can continue the work that the Scottish Government has already started on renewable energy, and we just need to drive that forward. But I would agree with you.
And that was taken back by the House of Lords in a wee amendment, not even discussed.
Well, I don't agree with you. And that's the great argument we can have in 2016 when we make the decision. I'm not opposed to us developing the wind and marine power and the work coming to our places here. The biggest problem we face in Scotland now is poverty that comes from gross levels of unemployment. That's the biggest problem we face. And I would not be in favour of having a brand new industry out there that we did not exploit to create the kind of jobs and the skills that we desperately need right now. So there's no contradiction between continuing what we're doing in the renewable energy, but we would be mad as a nation to have that resource, not exploit it, and not create the jobs that would give us the skills that our people require.
It's not so much a question as merely a statement.
Well, it needs to be very short, sir. Very short. There's actual questions here.
I'm 17 years old, and during the war I was 7. And during the war we used to sing, there'll always be an England as long as Scotland stands. Exactly.
Hi, it's just to the guy, the young boy on the end. You're talking about tuition fees. I've got 2 children at university, and at the moment they don't pay tuition fees thanks to the crowds at Holyrood. What makes you think we're going to have to pay them if we do vote yes? Vote no, sorry. What makes you think we're going to have to pay them?
Well, what I do find concerning is that the UK government's approach to the marketisation of higher education means that they are putting actually less public spending into the sector itself. And university chiefs down south have actually said that because of the cuts they're getting, the charge, and they're not seeing the benefit of the fees, they actually need to increase them even further. I believe it was the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University who said they needed to be raised to £16,000. So we are kind of seeing, as Philippa said with the NHS, we're seeing a trajectory with higher education in England, and this does affect us. Yes, education has devolved, but it affects us through Barnett consequential spending. Reduction in public spending on education in the rest of the UK at Westminster results in consequential cuts to the Barnett formula to Scotland's budget. So I have a real concern that if we remain within the Union, we will not have access to the tax revenues that allow us to sustain policies like free higher education for Scottish students.
Can I just come back to that as well? The thing is that, as Graeme says, obviously, in actual fact, our higher education budget has been going down because, as Graeme says, we get a proportion of what is spent. If the government isn't spending it, if the children are spending it, which is already happening because they're paying £9,000 a year down south, then our money for higher education has already gone down. And it's still the same as the NHS. We get our pocket money set by Westminster. So when their children are paying £12,000 or £16,000 a year, when they're paying to go to the GP, when all the services are run by these array of private providers in 10 years' time. So your children might get through, my son will get through, but their children won't. And that's the thing. The thing is, if we really believe in these things, and Scotland was the first country to have free school education for everyone. If we believe in that so important, why would we not want to take that control in our hands? As I said early in my speech, we send more money to Edinburgh. Why not keep that money here and we make the decision? We don't invade people. We don't spend 100 billion on new Trident, because Trident dies in 2025. It's not keeping Trident, it's building a new Trident, and actually spend that on the health, education and opportunities of our people. And I don't think that we will have a budget that will keep up. Our budget has shrunk in the last 7 years and it will continue to shrink. And eventually a Scottish government devolved within the UK would be forced into having to introduce fees.
I don't believe that. I just think some people are scaremongering. I also ask, what happens when the oil's finished?
Yes, no, that's a very fair question. There's at least 40 years of oil. Now, I was at the graduation ceremony at Heriot-Watt University a month ago when one of my grandsons graduated. And the Vice-Chancellor then makes a speech. And he speaks to the graduates, then he tells the audience how the university is doing. And the Vice-Chancellor explained that the university was very pleased to announce that it had another great chunk of money from the major oil companies into a special department of the university to assist them in the development of North Sea oil and gas. And his words were, of course, it's going to last for decades. Now, in that 40 years, if we use it more sensibly than it's been used up until now, then we're talking about a different contribution to the development of Scotland. If I said to you, here, you won the lottery last night, you get £7 million, but if you spend it all quickly, it'll go. But if you invest it sensibly, you and your family and your children and your grandchildren will benefit from it. And that's the approach we have to take to oil. But I quoted Margot on imagination and innovation. And it's somewhat difficult for Scots at the moment to be able to think outside the box of the United Kingdom. The lady who's just asked the question is thinking inside the box of the United Kingdom, believing that the oil will run out. It's what you do during the period that the oil's there. I have argued, and I hope somebody will take it up when we come to elect the new government, that we create that Scottish National Oil Corporation I talked about. Now, there's two reasons for that. It gives us a window into the oil industry which we know nothing about at the present time. Scotland's very ignorant about the oil industry. So if we have our own National Oil Corporation, we get a window into what is happening and a better understanding. But we also then are, in a sense, taking the oil itself. Forget about the taxation. Actually getting benefit from the oil itself selling in the international market. And I've argued that the Scottish universities should in fact get 1/3 of the stake in the Scottish National Oil Corporation, which would then give them constant stream of revenue from the dividends into higher education. That can help us maintain free education at all levels. Now, the lady's question was, why do we think that it wouldn't be free if we vote no? And I'll tell you. Bear in mind what Joanne Lamont said, that this is a something-for-nothing society. Also, there's the idea of free tuition for universities has in fact been under sustained attack inside Scotland. What they've been saying is a university graduate who's getting their university tuition free will earn something like £100,000 more during their career than a boy or a lassie who leaves 16, and that's unfair. They've had an advantage, therefore there should be a graduate tax or there should be tuition fees right at the beginning. So don't think in Scotland we are intellectually free from the argument that people should pay tuition fees. And you've got to bear in mind what happens politically and intellectually in a country which has voted no and shot itself in the foot and taken its power and given its power away. We are wide open, let me tell you. Let me just quote from Nigel Farage, because we don't read the English papers, but you should read the English papers. This is what they say down there about Alex Salmond and Nicola. Salmond and Sturgeon are just mouthy, groggy pub drunks who think that they can make a point into fact by screaming it the loudest. And Nigel Farage said, there would have to be a reckoning after the no vote, not just on the West Lothian question, but on finances. And we'll come under enormous pressure when they say those young people get an advantage, the others don't, so we should take the advantage away from them. Be very careful what you're voting for when you vote no.
With the baseball cap, chap with the red and blue jacket, his hands up earlier. I think I missed you, sir. No? And then
A very, very quick question from each of the panel. Yes or no? Do you think we're going to win?
This young chap here, this question. Any more hands?
My name is Stuart Wilson, I'm 19 years old, and my question laps into the younger generation, the poverty and the military sector of the independence referendum. I've seen quite a lot of my school friends, due to poverty and a lack of employment in this country, turn to the military sector to try and have some sort of financial stability. Now, a question that I've been wondering for quite a while is, since when you join the armed forces, be it the Navy, the Royal Air Force or the military itself, you swear allegiance to the Queen and country. And there has been quite a lot of debate saying that anyone who is in the armed forces currently, or is in the armed forces when Scotland goes independent, that they will be forced to move down to England to support, you know, Queen and country, as they would say. So I was just wondering if that is true or not.
Could you pass the microphone back to the man with the glasses? Take that question as well.
We've been talking a lot about money, of course, tonight, and the big question, the big topic that the No campaign keep using is what currency we're going to use. I'm quite fortunate with some of my friends here. We go abroad a lot, and we go to Denmark and Sweden and Norway. They all have their own currency. I know people who live in Malmö in Sweden, they travel every day to Copenhagen and vice versa. There's no problem whatsoever. But what would your thoughts on this be, Jim? I think personally we should just have our own pound, but I don't see that as a problem. If I'm in Holland, the first thing they ask you is, well, what currency do you want to pay in? There's no problem. Perhaps you might have a thought on that.
I'll deal with the currency. Let me deal fairly with Alex Salmond's position. I don't agree with him, I'll explain why. But what Alex Salmond says about it being beneficial to England is absolutely true. But we'll call it the rest of the UK England, because that's basically the folk that rule the place. And it's shortcut. They have had a balance of payments deficit for a very long time. They import more than they export. We provide a significant part of the balance of payments trade because we export far more than we import. And Alex's point was that if you take those Scottish exports out of the UK total, then they become more exposed as a weaker economy inside the United Kingdom. Therefore, Alex says, it's in your interest to have a currency union It's in our interest to have a currency union because there's no change takes place whatsoever. My objection, Alex, perfectly correct in that. My objection is that that gives the Bank of England a say over the Scottish budget. And Mr. Carney of the Bank of England was very, very fair, quite objective when he said there has to be a loss of sovereignty if you're in a currency union. And I don't want to vote for Scottish sovereignty and then share it with the Bank of England. There are alternatives. We can just use sterling. Now, sterling is used worldwide. When a Japanese tourist comes to play golf at St Andrews, he doesn't ask George Osborne, "Excuse me, sir, can I use sterling?" It's there. Everybody in the world uses it the way we use oil. Dollars are traded in oil. If we go to Germany, then we're in the Eurozone, and we don't ask the bank at Frankfurt if we can use the euro, because it's used worldwide as well. The problem with that is that we are using the currency of a foreign country, which England, UK will in fact be. And we've absolutely no influence over that at all. Certainly it's one-to-one, but we've no influence. If we have our own Scottish currency, this is the policy I would argue, that we would keep sterling for a year or 2 years, no problem, while we set up our own central bank and our own currency, and peg it one-to-one with sterling. The Scottish currency would not be a weak one, for the reason I explained earlier. If you export more than you import, you draw in foreign currency reserves, like yen, dollars, sterling, and the euro. So our central bank would have very substantial underpinning with foreign currency. That would then allow us to make sovereign decisions about our own currency. And I think that's the sensible policy. I don't want to assume I've been on the Margo Mobile all day. I better say no more.
Can I just start off a wee bit about the currency? Being Irish, growing up in Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland just kept the pound for like 50 years, and in Northern Ireland the shops took sterling or punts. When Ireland was in transition to the euro, they took sterling, punts and euros, and it really was no big deal. My husband's German. When they unified, the East Germans had the Ostmark, they had to change to the Deutschmark, and a few years later they changed to the euro. And they're not really doing too badly. All of you who are my age and above went through what was a much harder change in currency, which was decimalisation. And I remember, and I'd be like that now, going, "Excuse me, love, what's that in old money?" That woman doesn't know. But really, currency is just what you choose to deal in. I would absolutely agree. It's been made into a complete bogeyman, and the danger, if we have our own currency, is actually to be too strong and that our exports would get too expensive because it's an oil currency. And the lady behind you who was saying, what do we do when the oil runs out? When I mentioned about the earliest half of the 20th century, we didn't have oil then. We do export more than we import. We have whiskey, we have tourism, we have food and drink, we have manufacturing, we have life sciences, we lead in computer games, we have a very high density of universities who, believe me, are just as inventive as you Scots have always been. You know, the telephone, the television, all the rest of it. That gene hasn't died out, it's alive and well in our universities. And if we control that, we can actually put resource to get things from the laboratory bench or the idea on a computer and connect it up with businesses so that it becomes a reality that generates money. Scotland would not struggle. Obviously it takes organisation and it takes effort, but we have so much potential here. We're not going to be too poor.
Folks, we've run out of time, so the person who spoke first has the privilege of saying the last one. So, Graeme.
So just to kind of touch on the other two questions, in terms of the question regarding the allegiance and the armed forces, of course it is SNP policy that the monarch be retained in an independent Scotland, so I don't see how the oath would change if the monarch remained head of state. My personal view is that I favour a Scottish Republic, in which case my understanding is that it would be the army would swear allegiance to the state rather than to the monarch. In terms of the question that was asked, will yes win? I believe we will win, and I believe the reasons why we will win is positivity always trumps negativity. I believe that if you tell people that they're rubbish often enough and you keep doing it repeatedly, eventually they'll stop listening to you and say, I can go out and I can do this. And for those of you who yes in the audience, we've got 5 weeks left, so get out there and let's win it.
As a woman, I have to have the last word. Any of you who are here are yes. I hope that you're working your socks off. Any of you who are here who don't know and you still have questions will be hanging around for a while. Any of you who have moved to yes, get signed up and get working. It's 5 weeks today. It has gone from being a huge long campaign to being a blink of an eye left. We have a lot to do.